He's going to clap.
Oh, wow. Hello.
I literally warned you.
All right.
Hello. Okay, I'm going to stop being goofy. I'm going to start being real. Do I look fat? Can you tell me there's a belly?
Hey, welcome to the worship launch. My name is Zach Dietz, and it's our goal to equip worship leaders to build healthier teams. Today, I am joined by Andrew Layden. He's a good friend of mine, and we're going to be discussing the difference between a worship leader and a worship pastor. And before we get going, man, if you're not subscribed to this channel, go subscribe. Hit the little bell button so you stay notified every time we release a new video. And also comment in the comment section below and let us know what topics you want us to cover. But Andrew, let's dive in. I kind of want to kind of set the stage a little bit by opening with a passage of Scripture in 1 Timothy 3, 1 through 7. It talks about the characteristics of a pastor. And so it's not a job description of a pastor, it's just the characteristics. So I just want to read it real quick. It says, "This saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to be an overseer, he desires a noble work. An overseer, therefore, must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, self-controlled, sensible, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not an excessive drinker, not a bully, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not greedy. He must manage his own household competently and have his children under control with all dignity. If anyone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he take care of God's church? He must not be a new convert, or he might become conceited and incur the same condemnation as the devil. Furthermore, he must have a good reputation among outsiders, so that he does not fall into disgrace and the devil's trap." And before I ask you the first question, I want to the first instruction that's given there is to be somebody above reproach. And you know, as a kid, my parents, my mom would always use that phrase, like, we need to be living above reproach, and I had no idea what it meant. But I actually looked up that word in the Greek, and it just means blameless. I mean, to be blameless. And so I want to talk just a little about that from my point of view, and some boundaries that I've set as a worship pastor. And please hear me when I'm saying this. I by no means am the perfect worship pastor. My worship team could tell you how many times I've messed up, and I would agree with them. So, but I do want to just hold on to this blameless word for just a minute, because one of the things that I've put in place here when I first came here is I don't send a text message to another girl on my worship team without including my wife in that text. And the reason I do that is because I've had some really close friends in the ministry that have lost their ministry due to close relationships with women on their team, and it's turned into something else, and they've lost their ministry over it. And so one of the things my wife and I discussed when we came here is that, man, we want to be intentional with my own marriage. And so to me, that's part of living above reproach, because I want, when people see me, I want them to not have any reason or cause for blame. And so, and I know that's just a small thing, and I would hope my worship team would say that I'm above reproach, but I just wanted to set that stage a little bit as we dive into this discussion. Haven't even let you have a word yet, and I'm sorry. But I do want to ask you, what would you say is the difference between a worship leader and a worship pastor?
Excuse me. Yeah, thank you for having me, and excited to be here. And that's a great question. I think when we scripturally peel back what it means to lead worship, I think we see scripturally where there's a standard that's set to be above reproach, and I know that specifically is for what Scripture would call an overseer. And that's where I would maybe parallel to, as a worship leader, I think a lot of us would pretty immediately jump to, well, my worship pastor, and then there are my worship leaders, people who are on the team, volunteers. And so realistically, I think that we've taken the concept of leadership and pastoring, and we've separated them pretty distinctly in a harmless way. But I think that we have to return back to the place that leadership demands the kind of shepherd's heart and the kind of qualification that we see in Scripture that says if you are going to be pastoring, or let's extend that to say if you're going to be leading people in worship. The early church did not have the same American church hierarchy of like, well, that's the pastor and those are the volunteer disciples, And so I think realistically, for all intents and purposes, I think from the perspective of what does it mean to get on stage and instrument in hand lead people, I think leadership and pastoring should be included in the same thought. Mm-hmm. I think that being a worship leader, while you're not the pastor over that ministry, I think you as a worship pastor have above and beyond an opportunity and a role to pastor the people who are pastoring the people. And so that would be a pretty distinct difference, but just very simply put, everybody who leads worship should consider themselves an extension as a worship pastor in some way, shape, or form. And so while there may be differences, sure, in how we relate to people and how, this is your actual job. I'm not getting paid to lead worship with you. But so while I see you as a worship pastor over the Evergreen worship team, I recognize as a worship leader of Evergreen, my job, while it is to lead worship, it's to reflect the same pastoral extension that you have for the team into the congregation as well. So yeah, there are differences. Realistically, I think we should all do a good job of making sure that we're not just taking the difference between leadership and pastoring and separating ourselves and saying, well, I'm not the pastor. I think we should all hold ourselves to the highest standard of what it means to be that pastor.
Absolutely. And as I was reading that passage, I'm thinking there should be these same characteristics should be found in the worship leaders. It's not just the pastors that need to hold these characteristics with value, but hopefully if your shepherd or your worship pastor is living these out, hopefully that's carried on into the worship leadership. And I completely agree with you that worship leaders should be an extension of really the pastor's goal is to carry the vision of the team, but the worship leaders are right there with him. And so I want to talk about this a little bit because you've been in a pastor role for a long time, and this was your home church, Evergreen, and you've recently come back, and God's got you in a season of being in that worship leadership role, and as not a pastor, and I know that's hard on you. Like we've talked about that a little bit, but what have you been learning from that as God's kind of put you in this season?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is difficult when you have been in a position of authority in pastoring, just being very honest and real. The idea of coming into a position, volunteer, to kind of position yourself on the low rung of the ladder, it was difficult for a long time. When we first moved back to Tulsa, it was a chain of events we would have never written for ourselves. And in the process, I think God was sowing the seeds of, I want you to just go serve my church. And I said, great, I'll pastor wherever you want me to. And he said, that's not what I said. And so over time, as I have just been praying and learning and growing and submitting to God's vision, I've learned just the incredible importance of humility in the role of a leader, a pastor. And over again, the Lord has convicted me to say, if you're so caught up in in the semantics and the titles and the things that I don't care about, you're going to miss the opportunity to do the real kingdom work. And so in this season of not being in a pastoral role for the first time in many years, and being willing to, after a long period of time and correction, the Lord put me in a position of being willing to serve with so much joy and just say, I am so glad that I just get to be a part. I'm really, it doesn't matter how people see me or what I am to other people. As a large people personality, it's so important to me to have that relationship and that connection with people. And I'd put that unfairly in my insecurities of, well, if I'm a leader, if I'm a pastor, if I could wear this mantle, maybe that would, help me a lot more. And as God has taken that away and put me just into this role of being a volunteer leader, I think the thing that I've learned, and so many of us learn in these hard seasons, and I'm sure there's so many viewers that can empathize with this moment, that there is so much joy that comes when you receive the humility that is in God's heart, that doesn't focus on the wrong things, but focuses on the right things. And so for me, to answer the question, it took a lot of time for me to just get my heart and my focus back on where it needs to be as a worship leader, which is the presence of God, and not to get caught up in my own insecurities or my own frustrations or my own story that didn't go the way I expected it to. And in that process, I think humility and returning, as cliche as it might sound, to the heart of worship, to the place where I really just want God's presence. I really just want God's heart. And the fact that I get to play a small part in a church for other people to experience God with me, what a blessing,
Yeah, and when I think about you, I remember back when I was living in Lubbock, Texas, and I was a volunteer at a church. I wasn't a worship pastor. I was just running sound at a church, and I loved it. But when I look back at that time period, and I've talked with you about this, but when I look back at that time period, what I wish I could go back and do is my worship pastor there, his name was Jim, and I wish I could go back to Jim and just say, hey, listen, I want to serve to the best of my ability here. Because I think I was kind of in this weird thing of okay, I want to be a worship pastor. I feel like I should be doing this. But that was selfish ambition for me. But I wish I could go back to Jim and say, dude, okay, I'm here for you, whatever you need. And there has to be some boundaries there. I mean, you've got to establish boundaries to say, listen, I've also got to protect my time with family, but I want to serve to the best of my ability where I can serve. And I've seen that in you since you've been here, and just unselfishly serving, and your wife as well, and just incredible worship leaders. But I've also, it's interesting that you mentioned at the first of this video about worship leaders and worship pastors kind of serving in the same role, because I see you as a pastor still, and there are several people on our team that I see as shepherds of our worship team, because you're still investing in the people around you, and so and I've just been blessed to have you and your wife here, and all the other people that serve on our team.
And I appreciate that a lot. It's kind. And just another thought too, as far as just that difference between leadership and pastoring, and what it means when you aren't that pastor. I think there's a pastor in California that I love that mentioned this in an analogy of a Thanksgiving meal. And he said, this is such a great picture of the church, of the community of God, that, in a consumer mindset in America, we want it, delivered to us, and we expect it to be great. A Thanksgiving meal is we all get in the kitchen and we collaborate together and we produce this meal. And he said, what an amazing picture of the servants of God coming together in like-mindedness. And there's a comment that he made in that really struck me. And he said, at no point, he's like, I peel potatoes. That's my job. That's what I do every year. But he said, at no point am I itching to say, one of these days, I'm going to be the turkey carver. Like there's this pinnacle of, if I could just get to this point, then I'll have the significance I want, because everyone is going to experience the best part of the meal because of me. And I think that parallels so well with this mentality of, if we're focused so much in a leadership role of what's the next thing, when am I going to get to pastor, we miss out on the entire experience of pastoring with what God has given us. And I think of Scripture when God says, steward what you have. He's not looking at the title or the size. He's looking at the faithfulness and the obedience to say, will you take what I have given you as a leader, as a volunteer? And I don't want to discourage people who are legitimately called to leadership and know later in my life, I know I'm probably going to pastor. That's very real, and I affirm that calling in people's lives, but not at the cost of stewardship and leadership, like you were saying. I don't want to look back at this season and say, did I miss out on what God had for me because I was so focused on being a pastor that I missed the opportunity to be obedient?
Yeah, that's awesome. So do you feel like it's easier today for worship pastors, speaking specifically of worship pastors, to get their roles reversed a little bit? And what I mean by that is, it seems like we have a lot of guys today who just want to show up on Sunday and not have really a job description, but really just show up, do the music, lead the people, and then come back next week. Yeah. Do you feel like it's easier to fall into that trap today? And if so, why? Why do you think that is?
For sure. Absolutely it is. I think our culture, the American culture, music is unbelievable today than what it was even 50 years ago, much more 100 plus. And if you look at the history of the church, worship has always been important. Music has been important as well. And we see in Psalms so much of the harp and the lyre and the horns and the cymbals, and there's so much that music has had an important aspect. And only recently do I feel like, with just our celebration of music culture, music television, music everything, have we really put a heavy impact on the music itself, which it's a blessing and a curse. I think that, it goes back to stewardship. As we steward our music, it creates opportunity for incredible things, incredible excellence that I believe gives honor to God, and I think of someone who, is playing guitar. Maybe they've played for a couple weeks and they've learned a couple chords. God finds their worship so pleasing. You know what I mean? And the reality is, we want to worship with that same heartbeat, but there's something really incredible about a worship team that is, I hesitate to use the word manicured, but that is excellent, that is practiced and shown up. There's a large team, and you've got a great guy in the back mixing it. All of these things really can be used to enhance and enrich our experience, but the caveat really becomes, what are we worshiping? And it was similar to what the quote from a book we mentioned before we even started recording today of, if we associate music with the power and the presence of God, we actually do ourselves a dangerous disservice of making way too much of music what it really shouldn't be at all. And I think that's the danger that worship pastors can fall into, because worship music is almost a subculture now. How many times have we, sent videos to friends and been like, just be ready, like this song's gonna wreck you, I can't wait to show you the new release from X, Y, or Z, so we love worship music, and it has become its own unique genre. Now we have worship music stations that we listen to, Spotify playlists, so much. And so really we run the risk, if we're not cautious, of making even the music about God an idol to God himself. And I don't think that that's ever been a worship pastor's intention, but it really boils down to there is a separation between music, which is a medium, and your calling as a pastor, which uses music. Like I've always said, I'm not that great of a guitarist, and people go, "Oh no, but you're great." I'm like, I know how to play chords. Like that's not real musicianship, because guitar for me and piano it's really just the medium that I can use to set the backdrop for what I really want to do, which is lead people, And I think the big difference between worship pastoring and leading, that could be negative. If worship pastors get on the wrong train, they will worship the music to the point where we really forget the importance of the pastoral position, which, like you've said, is to shepherd the people. And I love, this is something I've learned and seen from you where, on a Sunday morning, you have no problem, like, kind of slowing down and letting the music die and just saying, let's just talk for a second, where a lot of people would say, well, we got to perfect that transition. We got to layer these things and make sure we're going seamlessly to the next song. I love your heart that says, before we even touch a note, can we talk for a minute? And I love that because the people respond because it really becomes this sacred moment where they're listening to their worship pastor, not their worship leader, say, here's the next line of the song. Isn't this great to sing? Which still honors God. But what you have the opportunity to do, and what all the worship pastors who are listening have the opportunity to do, is to not just kind of escort people into the throne room, but to disciple them into learning what it means to live a lifestyle of worship, to set our hearts and our minds in the right place. And I think the moment that we take music and we make it the extraordinary passion, there's nothing wrong with making it a passion, and I believe in excellence, and I believe in professionalism, and I want it to be, I want it to be a sweet sound to the Lord, but I want that to come from my heart more than it comes from my hands, So
yeah. I think, golly, there are so many churches putting out incredible worship music right now. And I think it's easier. I like to think when we're doing these conversations, I like to think about brand new worship leaders coming in, who feel called to be a worship pastor. And so I'm thinking about those guys right now, or girls, who are feeling called to go into worship ministry. And I think it's so easy to look at these churches who are doing big things with worship music and say, man, I want to be a part of a team like that. And when really what their thought is I'd love to be on that team, but they don't think about the weight that comes with being a shepherd.
Sure.
And I'm thinking specifically right now, we're in a season of COVID, and 2020 was rough. There were a lot of things that happened, and I'm not even talking about COVID, but there were things in 2020 that were rough on our worship team, some hard things. And, I think that's kind of where, as a worship pastor, if you're feeling called to worship ministry, get it out of your head that this is just playing music, because there's so much that goes into being a pastor and shepherding your people. So I would just encourage new worship leaders, get it out of your head that you're just gonna go join this awesome worship team, and all you have to do is put your stuff in planning center, send out the songs, and then show up on Sunday. There's so much junk that happens during the week, and just be prepared to be a shepherd, and be in prayer right now as a young worship leader. Okay, God, would you help me develop in this area? And like we said last week, find somebody who will mentor you in being a shepherd, because that's where it's at as a worship pastor. So, man, another question I've got for you is what advice would you give to worship leaders as well as worship pastors in embracing their roles?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think two things. Number one, to tack on to what you're saying, the importance of what it means to shepherd and to not glamorize the worship leader look. I think more than ever, our culture is really good about if we can just look the part, maybe we can act the part. And so I think it's easy for a lot of young people to you showed up on Sunday and you've got, the skinny jeans and the Chelsea boots, man, you really look like you know what you're doing, right? You've got the Martin or the Taylor or whatever. And I think that we spend so much time, and it really comes from a place of insecurity, that if I could maybe just put my feet in those shoes and walk enough space and time, eventually I'll start behaving the way I want to. I think more than anything, my biggest piece of advice is to be in a worship ministry for the purpose of serving the heart of God. And I think that the moment you unplug, and I don't mean to communicate to unplug from your call to people, because that has to be there. But the moment you unplug from everything that is not just pursuing the face of God, how often we say this to pastors all the time, that whatever's done in public is going to overflow out of your personal, private walk with Jesus. And I think if you're getting on stage on a Sunday morning as a worship leader or pastor, and you're wanting to just sing the songs because you love the music, and reality is, what it is. If you're there for the wrong reasons, the remedy for whatever situation it is, you have to earnestly desire to see and seek the face of God. Mm-hmm. And when that becomes a Monday through Saturday experience, Sunday mornings will look different because of it, So good. And then the other thing I would say specifically to worship leaders is I believe that honor is like currency in the church and in the kingdom, that if you are in a place, I understand what it means to be in a place and in a season where you're not where you want to be, and not out of a place of selfish ambition even. It could just be out of a place of, I know God's called me in this direction. Mm-hmm. And I think of Joseph, who went through so much in his life, and the test of faithfulness and stewardship and obedience was not... It wasn't just getting to the end result. He had an amazing end result way in the future, but he was faithful in Potiphar's house when no one else was looking, and the integrity ended him up in jail, or landed him in jail. And so I just think the more that, if you can take this idea and then kind of back to where I was before, more rabbit trails. If you can get to this place of just stewarding where God has you in the leadership that he has you in. My job, and I told this to you the first time we had a conversation, my job every single week is to get on stage and support you to the best of my ability. And I'm going to naturally, because this is part of my heart, and it wasn't always like this, the Lord taught me, I'm naturally going to want to lead people and disciple people, and I want it to be about leading people into the throne room and me just seeking the face of God. But most importantly, aside from that, as well, is, I think of the story of David and Saul, that it doesn't matter if you've got a great worship pastor or a hard one. God has called you to steward the season you're in by honoring your authority. And I think there will be nothing but blessing that comes when you honor your authority, good or bad. I'm thankful to have a great one, but my first conversation coming onto the worship team here was, what do you need and how can I do it for you? Because my heart and my goal, and what I would encourage all worship leaders, this is coming from someone who was a pastor and who now is back on the other side of the curtain, so to speak. And what I think your pastor would never really, and maybe they would ask for it, but maybe they just don't know how to. Speaking as someone who was a pastor and now isn't, the most valuable thing that you can give your pastor is just full godly submission to their vision and to their authority. And it is okay if it's not, like you've said it great, that, I may not always do the right thing, or I'm not the perfect worship pastor, but that doesn't matter. My responsibility and my God-given assignment is to seek his face, to lead his people. And there's nothing wrong with enjoying music, but in the process of all of that, it's to stay authentically submitted to the leadership that God has you under. So I think when you bundle all that together, you've got great success, whether you're a pastor or a leader. And for worship pastors, it's your senior pastor. Maybe they tell you to cut the best song in the set, and it's like, bad idea, but hey, I'm going to submit to my leadership. Yeah. So regardless, when you compile all of this information, it comes out to a real simple: if you want to be a great worship leader, worship pastor, lead the people, seek the face of God, honor the authority that's around you, and I promise you, God's blessing will show up in your worship service in a way that it hasn't in a very long time.
Man, that's so good. And I like the part about seeking God's face during the week, I think is such an overlooked thing in worship today. And I'm so grateful that on this worship team, I know the hearts of our people on this team, and I know how these people are seeking the heart of God, and I get to do life with them. So I know that their relationship with God is solid. And so, man, that is such a good word. Seek the face of God during the week. And honestly, as and you said this a little bit, but as a worship pastor here, my goal is we have a vision for our worship team, and our worship team knows that. I've put it in front of them. Hopefully, I mention it enough to where it's getting engraved. But my vision for the worship team that God has given me flows from the vision of the pastor. And so I never want to go off course from what the vision of the church that God has given our pastor. I don't ever want to veer off track with that. I just want to help complement that with what the worship ministry is doing. And so, man, such a good word. Thanks for joining us today. I will definitely have you on again if you'll do it, So, but thank you guys for joining us, man. If you like this content, if you're enjoying it, go subscribe and comment in this comment section below, because we want to hear from you. What is it that you need to hear? What is it that you're facing? What kind of battles are you facing in your worship ministry? Let us know. We want to talk about them. So thanks for joining us. Have a great day.